Have you ever wondered why somebody can look directly at evidence that challenges what they believe and still hold on tighter? And before my atheist folks start laughing, this ain't just a religious problem. We all do this. Politics, relationships, family, religion, our own opinions. Once something becomes part of who you are, changing your mind ain't as simple as somebody showing us a better argument. Because sometimes changing your mind costs you something. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about something that I think gets overlooked in these conversations. Why is letting go so hard? Because I know from personal experience, sometimes the hardest part isn't realizing that something might not be true. The hardest part is realizing what happens to your life if you admit it. Welcome back to the Jewish Skeptic. No fear, no dogma, just clarity. And today we're talking about the psychological cost of certainty. Now, I know that sounds like some college classroom mess. So let me make it real simple. When you've believed something for a long time, that belief usually doesn't sit by itself, you know. It gets connected to everything else. Your family, your friends, your childhood, your morality, your fears, your hopes, your idea of what happens when you die, your idea of why you're here, your idea of who you are. So when somebody challenges that belief, your brain isn't always hearing, hey, here's some new information. Sometimes your brain hears, everything you built around your life might be wrong. And that's the difference. And I understand that because I spent most of my life as a Christian. Christianity wasn't just a position I had on whether God existed. It was the world I lived in, y'all. God was watching me. Jesus died for me. Heaven was real. Hell was real. Prayer worked. The Bible was God's word, you know. There was a plan for my life. Those weren't individual ideas sitting in separate boxes, y'all. They all supported each other. So imagine pulling one of those pieces out. What happens to everything else? And this is where I want to start, because changing your mind gets a whole lot harder when the belief your question has become part of who you are. Once I started seriously studying theology and religious history, I started asking questions that I had never asked before, y'all. And some of those questions had answers I was not expecting. Then I had a choice. I could follow the questions where they went, or I could protect what I already believed in. And believe me, protecting it would have been easier, because question one belief started touching everything. If this part of the Bible wasn't what I thought it was, what about this other part? If this doctrine developed over time, what about this doctrine? If other religions had people just as convinced as I was, what made my certainty different from theirs? And then you start feeling that tension. Psychologists have a term called cognitive dissonance. Now, don't get hung up on that name, y'all. It basically means this. You got two things in your head that don't sit comfortably together. I know my religion is true, but then I'm seeing information that doesn't fit what I've always believed. That feeling is uncomfortable. And when we're uncomfortable, we want the discomfort to stop, don't we? But here's the interesting part. There are two ways to make it stop. One, you can reconsider the belief, or two, you can get rid of the information challenging it. And usually getting rid of the information is usually easier, That's why somebody can send you evidence, and instead of dealing with evidence, you immediately start looking for reasons a person giving it to you must be wrong. You'll say something to yourself like, oh, they're biased, or they're angry at God, or they just want to sin, or they're being deceived, or, Satan is confusing them. They didn't really understand Christianity. And like the one I heard the other day, you wasn't really a real Christian. You were never a real Christian. Notice what's happening, though. You don't have to deal with the argument anymore. You can just deal with the person. But now here's where this gets deeper, y'all. Because sometimes you're not protecting the argument. You're protecting an identity. When your belief feels like part of who you are, criticism of the belief can start feeling like criticism of you. That's why some religious conversations get emotional real fast. I'm simply asking, what evidence supports this? But that other person may hear, your mother was wrong. Your pastor lied to you. Your childhood was fake. Your dead grandmama believed a lie. Everything you built your life around means nothing. Now, that's not what I said at all. But emotionally, that can be what the question feels like. And that's why I think skeptics need to understand something too. You can have all the evidence and the best argument in the world, and someone still may not be ready to hear it. Because you're thinking about the evidence. They're thinking about what they might lose. Let's say somebody has been in church for 40 years, kind of like I used to be. Their spouse goes to church. Their children go to church. Their parents went to church. Their closest friends are at church. And everyone they know believes. Now, imagine them waking up one morning and saying, I don't think I believe this anymore. That ain't just changing an opinion. That could change their marriage, their friendships, their relationships with their parents, the way their children see them, their social life, their entire community, maybe even their job, depending on where they work. There's a real cost attached to saying, I don't know anymore. And that brings me to probably the biggest part of this for a lot of people, y'all. Fear. This one was big for me. If you've been taught hell from childhood, you don't just stop being afraid because somebody showed you a historical problem with the Bible. Your brain don't work like that. You can intellectually stop believing something while emotionally still reacting to it. Think about it. You can say, I don't believe hell is real, and still have that little thought come through your mind. But what if I'm wrong? That is powerful. Because now the belief has a built-in punishment for questioning the belief. Question too much? Maybe you're being led away from God. Stop believing? You can go to hell. Listen to skeptics? Maybe Satan is using them. And once you understand that, you understand why walking away can be terrifying. Because you're not simply asking someone to reconsider an idea. From their perspective, you might be asking them to risk eternity. And that's a much bigger emotional decision than, hey, I found some information you should read. But fear ain't the only thing keeping us there. There's another part of this that gets stronger the longer you believed it. Time. What happens when you believe something for 20, 30, 40, 50 years? Nobody likes feeling like they wasted their time. Nobody likes looking back and thinking, I defended this. I taught this to my children. I gave money to this. I made decisions based on this. I judge people because of this. I spent decades believing this. That's hard. And there's a temptation to think I've already invested too much into this to turn around now. We do this outside of religion too. People stay in bad relationships because they've already spent 10 years in them. People keep throwing money into bad investments because they've already lost so much. Sometimes the amount we've already invested makes it harder to walk away. But time spent believing something doesn't make it true. And changing your mind don't erase your past. That is something I had to learn myself. I didn't wake up one morning and say, wow, I was stupid for 40 years. No, I believed what made sense to me based on the information I had, the environment I grew up in, and the questions I knew how to ask at the time. But then I learned more. And when I learned more, my conclusions change. That's not something I'm ashamed of. That's what I want my mind to do, actually. If better information can't change my conclusion, then what am I doing? I'm not searching for truth anymore. I'm protecting a position. And here's another piece we don't talk about enough. Even if we remove the fear, the family, and all the years you've invested, certainty itself feels good to you, don't it? I'll show you. Let me give you examples. I know why we're here. Comfortable. I know what happens after death. Comfortable. I know God has a plan. Comfortable. I know good will eventually win. Comfortable. You know what's not comfortable? I don't know. That's one of the hardest sentences for human beings to say, ain't it? I don't know why we're here. I don't know what happened before the universe reached its earliest state. I don't know if there's something beyond death. I don't know whether some kind of God exists outside of everything we're capable of observing. I don't know. For years, I would have thought saying, I don't know, showed weakness. Now, I think it's one of the most responsible things somebody can actually say, because pretending to know doesn't turn uncertainty into knowledge. It just makes us feel better. And this is where certainty can come expensive. Because once you convince yourself that you absolutely can't be wrong, you stop investigating. Why would you investigate something you already know? Why listen to another perspective? Why study another religion? Why question your interpretation? Why seriously listen to someone who disagrees? You've already got the answer, right? And that's when certainty can become a cage, in my opinion. Not because having confidence is bad. There's nothing wrong with being confident when the evidence supports it, though. The problem comes when certainty becomes more important than truth, because truth has to be allowed to surprise you. Truth has to be allowed to disappoint you. Truth has to be allowed to disagree with what your parents taught you. Truth has to be allowed to disagree with your pastor. Truth has to be allowed to disagree with me. And we know how that is, because y'all be having a field day in the comments, but you'll be all right. And this is where all this comes back to skepticism. If tomorrow somebody demonstrates that I'm wrong about something, I want to know. That's the whole point of skepticism. Skepticism isn't walking around screaming, everything is fake. Y'all, that's not skepticism. Skepticism is being willing to ask, how do I know? And maybe more importantly, what could change my mind? Because that's a dangerous question when you're emotionally attached to an answer. Just ask yourself that sometimes. What evidence would change my mind? If the answer is nothing, then we're not talking about evidence anymore. We're talking about protecting a belief. And I think this is why some of the conversations we have on this channel get so heated. Sometimes I ask what I think is a simple question. How do you know? And somebody responds like I insulted their entire family, y'all. But maybe now we understand why. How do you know? That can threaten a lot more than one belief. It can threaten certainty, and certainty feels safe. I understand it. I understand that. I mean, I really do. So now let me bring all this together. I eventually reached a point where I had to make a decision. Do I want certainty, or did I want truth? Because I couldn't promise myself that searching for truth would leave me where I started. And that's the risk. If you're only willing to investigate as long as Christianity stays true, you're not investigating Christianity. If you're only willing to investigate as long as Islam stays true, you're not investigating Islam. If you're only willing to investigate as long as atheism stays true, you're not investigating atheism neither. You've already decided what the answer has to be. And I don't want to live like that. I'd rather have an uncomfortable question than a comfortable answer I can't demonstrate. And maybe that's the real psychological cost of letting go. Sometimes you're not just losing the answer. You're losing certainty. You're losing being familiar. You might lose community. You might disappoint people. You might have to rebuild your parts of yourself, you know. You might have to become comfortable saying, I don't know. That's hard for some people. But there's something on the other side of that too. You get permission to ask the question without being afraid of the answer. And for me, y'all, that changed everything. So if you're watching this and you're questioning something you believe your entire life, I ain't gonna tell you what conclusion you're supposed to reach. That's your journey. I'm just gonna tell you something I wish more people had told me. You are allowed to ask the question. You are allowed to examine the evidence. You are allowed to say, I don't know. And if something is true, your questions can't make it false. So don't be afraid of the question. Ask it. Follow the evidence where it goes, even when letting go is hard. I'm CJ. This is the Jewish Skeptic. No fear, no dogma, just clarity. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.
Do you know what I found? The more you know, the less you know.